Rachel had always loved writing. Since she was a young girl, she found solace in words, weaving stories to escape the quiet chaos of her small town. Her childhood was filled with scribbled pages of adventure, romance, and far-off places. But even as she grew older, writing remained a complicated relationship for her. Dyslexia made it hard for her to get the words down on paper the way she imagined them in her mind. Spelling mistakes, grammar errors, and misaligned thoughts haunted her attempts, leaving her frustrated. But the more the words resisted, the more determined she became. Writing wasn't just an escape for Rachel, it was her calling. And she refused to let her challenges take away her passion. When she received the acceptance letter from Eastwood University, one of the most prestigious writing programs in the country, it felt like a dream. This was her chance, her shot at proving not just to the world but to herself that she could be more than the girl who struggled with spelling. She was a writer. She had a voice, a story to tell, and here was the place where she could make it happen. What stood between her and her future were the professors and peers who would shape her, and among them, Professor Jonathan Reed loomed like a gatekeeper, well-known, respected, and revered for his expertise. He was the person who could either make or break a writer. He had a reputation for pushing his students hard, but it was said that only the best could handle his scrutiny. Rachel wasn't sure if she would fall into that category, but she had faith that this was her chance to prove that she was capable. The first few weeks of class were a whirlwind of excitement. Rachel threw herself into the assignments, eager to impress Reed and her classmates. She worked late into the night, trying to perfect her writing, spending hours on each paper, every sentence, and every word. She wanted to show Reed, the famous professor, that she belonged there. But it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. In the first few assignments, Rachel received scathing critiques from Reed. At first, she thought he was just pushing her to be better, but soon it became clear that his critiques weren't about making her a stronger writer. They were about tearing her down. He highlighted every mistake, marked every misspelled word, and didn't spare her the public humiliation of pointing out each flaw in front of the class. The turning point came during one class, when Reed decided to read her assignment aloud. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as he began, his voice cutting through the air with a dismissive tone. Every word felt like a slap, each correction a reminder of how she wasn't good enough. Her classmates' laughter stung as Reed mocked her choices of words and phrasing, focusing not on the potential of her writing, but on its imperfections. "This is what happens when someone without the basic skills attempts literature," Reed said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The room went silent after that, and Rachel wanted nothing more than to disappear. That moment marked the beginning of Rachel's internal battle. The professor's words lingered in her mind long after the class ended. "You lack the intellectual capacity to be a serious writer," Reed had said in private, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "You might want to consider a career that doesn't require such deep thinking." She had thought he was joking at first, but the coldness in his voice told her he wasn't. In those words, Rachel heard the confirmation of what she had feared her whole life, that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she loved writing, she wasn't good enough. She wasn't smart enough to make it. The weight of his words hit her like a wave. All the dreams she had of being a successful writer, all the stories she had created in her mind, suddenly seemed impossible. She felt like a fraud, someone who had no place in a writing program like Eastwood's, someone who didn't belong with the other students whose writing seemed so effortless compared to hers. The humiliation wasn't just about the grades, it was about her worth as a writer, as a person. She started doubting everything she had once been so sure of. Maybe Reed was right. Maybe writing wasn't meant for her. But there was a fire within Rachel that refused to let go of the dream, even in the face of Reed's cruelty. She couldn't ignore the drive that had always been with her, the pull to write, to tell stories. She wasn't going to let a professor define her potential. So, instead of succumbing to the weight of his criticism, she channeled the pain into something stronger. She started writing more than ever before. Every assignment became a battle, every essay an opportunity to prove Reed wrong. She stayed up late, pouring her heart into her work, determined to show that she could be a writer despite the obstacles. But each paper, each grade, reminded her of how far she had to go. Still, there was something inside of her, something that refused to quit. As the semester wore on, Rachel knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let Reed's words control her future. They would haunt her, yes, but they would not define her. She had something inside of her that Reed could never take away, her passion for writing, her belief that she could do it, and that was something he could never measure or break. Even as she sat with his scathing feedback in front of her, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Rachel didn't give up, even though the weight of Professor Reed's criticism threatened to bury her dreams. Each comment, each dismissal, was like a fresh wound, but she refused to let it stop her. She found herself at the writing center more often than in class, sitting across from tutors who patiently helped her with her spelling, her grammar, and the structure of her sentences. They encouraged her, but it wasn't enough to erase the sting of Reed's cruel words. She worked late into the night, reworking drafts, sometimes crying in frustration, but always coming back to the page. Writing was the one thing that made sense to her, even when everything else felt impossible. There were days when she wanted to quit, when she thought maybe Reed had been right, that she wasn't cut out for it, but she kept going, telling herself that her love for writing was stronger than any insult. And then there was her secret project. While she pored over assignments for Reed's class, trying to meet his impossible standards, Rachel had started writing something just for herself, a novel. It wasn't for anyone else to read, not yet. It was a story of personal growth and self-discovery, the kind of story she felt deep in her soul, the kind she wished she could write in her assignments, but knew Reed would rip apart. It was her escape, her place where she didn't have to meet anyone's expectations except her own. She worked on it late at night, after finishing her coursework, filling notebooks with pages and pages of ideas, characters, and plots. She was careful to keep this project hidden from her professors, especially Reed. If he knew, he would tear it apart just like everything else, but something inside her whispered that this story was important. It was the one thing she could truly control, the one thing she had that was entirely her own. The months went by, and the semester came to an end. Rachel stood at the edge of graduation, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had worked harder than anyone she knew, but it didn't seem to matter. She had received a D in Reed's class, the grade that felt like a final judgment on her future. How could she be a writer if a professor with so much experience told her she didn't have what it took? That grade felt like a betrayal, but Rachel wasn't ready to give up yet. Graduation came and went, and she tried to convince herself that it didn't matter. She pushed her manuscript aside for a while, feeling lost, like the dream she had worked so hard for was slipping away. She couldn't write publicly anymore. She couldn't bear to face the judgment of the world, especially Reed's lingering voice in her head telling her she was never going to be good enough. She quit writing for a time, pretending to be okay, but deep down, she knew the story wasn't finished. Her story wasn't finished. After graduation, Rachel moved to New York, trying to make a life for herself. She landed a job at a publishing house, starting from the bottom, answering phones, making copies, and fetching coffee for the editors. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and it gave her a front-row seat to the literary world she had always dreamed of. But even in the chaos of her new job, Rachel couldn't let go of the one thing that had always defined her, writing. In the quiet hours after work, she would sit at her small desk, working on her novel. It was the only place where she felt truly alive, where the doubts faded away for a few precious hours. She was determined to finish it, to prove to herself, if no one else, that she could be a writer. But the rejections came, one after another. She sent out query letters, hopeful but nervous, each one returning with a polite but firm rejection. The editors didn't think her manuscript was ready, or they didn't see the potential they were looking for. With each rejection, her confidence was chipped away, but something kept her going. She couldn't stop now. She had to finish this, even if the world didn't believe in her. She believed in herself. Even though she doubted whether she was good enough, Rachel kept writing, kept submitting, and kept fighting for her place in the world of literature. Then, one day, an editor at a small publishing house took a chance on her manuscript. They saw something in the evening stars, something that resonated with them. It wasn't an instant success, but it was enough to keep her going. It was the first step toward something bigger, something real. The book slowly gained traction, word of mouth spreading among readers who found themselves captivated by Rachel's writing. A review from a literary blog caught the attention of a bigger publisher, and soon her novel was re-released with a larger marketing push. The success didn't come all at once, but the reviews were positive, the readers were growing, and the dreams Rachel had once thought were impossible started to feel within reach. Rachel's journey had been long, and at times it had felt impossible, but in the quiet moments of victory, when she saw her book on the shelves or received a glowing review, she knew that the fight had been worth it. Every rejection, every late night spent writing alone, every tear shed over a harsh critique had led her to this moment. The Evening Stars was no longer just a manuscript hidden in a drawer. It was her story, and it was finally being heard. Despite everything, despite the criticism and the doubt, Rachel had found her place as a writer. It wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. And now, she was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had earned her success, every word of it. Rachel's life had changed in ways she had never imagined. The Evening Stars, the novel she had poured her heart and soul into, became a New York Times bestseller, earning praise for its emotional depth, its complex characters, and its raw, unfiltered portrayal of growth and self-discovery. It was everything Rachel had dreamed of. People were talking about her book, connecting with it on a personal level. The characters she had created, the struggles they faced, and the triumphs they achieved were resonating with readers across the world. Critics were calling it a breakthrough debut and a voice that will define a generation, and the praise kept coming. Before she knew it, the book's success launched her career into the stratosphere. International rights deals followed, and soon there were talks of a film adaptation. For Rachel, it was surreal. This was the life she had always wanted, but it seemed almost too perfect. She had spent so many years doubting herself, questioning whether she was capable of this kind of success, and now, here she was, holding the world in her hands. The emails from foreign publishers, film producers, and agents flooded in, each one eager to make their mark on her journey. It was the kind of recognition she had always dreamed of, but it came with its own set of challenges. As Rachel navigated this new world, she found herself balancing the excitement of her success with the pressure to live up to expectations. But no matter how much her career grew, there was one thing she couldn't forget: the voice of Professor Reed. While Rachel was basking in the glow of her newfound success, Reed remained focused on his academic career, blissfully unaware of what was happening outside the world of the classroom. He continued to teach at Eastwood, still critiquing students with the same harshness, still wearing that smug, self-assured expression that had always rubbed Rachel the wrong way. She hadn't given him much thought after graduation, but every now and then, his words echoed in her mind, reminding her of how far she'd come despite his dismissive attitude. It was impossible to completely escape the memory of those early days, when his criticism had felt like the death knell of her dreams. Then came the call from her publicist. A literary festival had invited Rachel to be a featured speaker. The festival was one of the biggest events in the literary world, attended by top authors, publishers, and agents from around the globe. Rachel was both thrilled and terrified. This was a huge opportunity for her career, a chance to show the world that she had earned her place among the literary elite. But there was a catch. Professor Reed would be attending the same festival, and that brought a flood of old emotions rushing back. Rachel hadn't seen Reed in years, but the thought of facing him again stirred up a cocktail of anxiety and anticipation. She had achieved everything he had told her she couldn't, and now she was going to be sharing a stage with him. It felt like a final test, a chance to prove to herself, once and for all, that she was worthy of the success she had fought so hard to attain. She knew she was no longer the same person who had sat in his classroom, crushed by his harsh words. But would the lingering doubts still haunt her when faced with him in person? As the festival drew nearer, Rachel found herself reflecting on everything she had been through. She had gone from the girl who had been told she wasn't good enough to be a writer to the woman whose book was changing lives. Her journey had been anything but easy, but she had made it. The success of the Evening Stars had validated everything she had worked for. She was finally living the life she had always dreamed of, but the thought of seeing Reed again brought back memories she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Still, Rachel knew that she had grown. She had nothing left to prove to him or anyone else. She was ready, or at least she hoped she was, to face him head-on and show him, without saying a word, how wrong he had been. The festival opened with a buzz of excitement. Writers, publishers, and literary critics filled the grand hall, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. The spotlight was on Rachel as she stood backstage, her heart racing. She had prepared for this moment for months. It wasn't just any speech. It was the speech that would solidify her place among the literary elite. As one of the keynote speakers, she was set to share her journey from the girl who almost gave up on writing to the woman whose novel had captured the world's attention. But even as the crowd's murmurs grew louder, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, could ruin this moment. She glanced at the program again. There it was, in black and white. Professor Jonathan Reed was also attending the festival. It had been years since she had seen him, but she remembered every detail about him. The sharp, mocking tone, the way he dismissed her like she was invisible. She told herself she was prepared, that she had moved on, but the anxiety gnawed at her. Today, she would not just be sharing her success with the world. She would be facing the man who had tried to break her spirit. When Rachel stepped onto the stage, the applause was overwhelming. She felt the weight of her success and the power of this moment. She had made it. But as she scanned the crowd, her eyes landed on Reed. He was sitting in the front row, his expression unchanged, his eyes cold and distant. He looked exactly the same as he had in college, stern, unimpressed, and unyielding. The sight of him sent a jolt of unease through her, and for a moment, she hesitated. But then she remembered why she was here. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, who had been pushed to the margins. She was here to prove that dreams, no matter how impossible, could come true. After her introduction, Rachel took a deep breath and began. She talked about the years of struggle, the constant doubts, and the setbacks. She spoke candidly about how Reed's harsh words had almost stopped her from writing altogether, how his critique had nearly crushed her. But she also told the audience about the drive that had fueled her to keep going, how she had used his criticisms as fuel to prove him wrong. It wasn't just a story about writing, it was a story about resilience, about defying expectations, and about believing in herself when no one else did. As she spoke, she could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, their attention fully captured. She had their support, and that was all she needed. But then, during a break in her speech, she heard a voice behind her, low and dismissive. Well, if it isn't Rachel Williams, the best-selling author. I never thought I'd see the day, Reed's voice sneered. Rachel turned to find him standing just behind her, his arms crossed, the same smug expression on his face. He looked her up and down as if she were a curiosity, a mistake that had somehow turned out better than he expected. Must be nice to get invited to events like this, Reed continued, loud enough for few nearby festival-goers to hear. I'm surprised they let you in. Do they know you're a writer? Or did you just pay your way here? He chuckled to himself, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. Found yourself a new hobby, have you? His words stung more than Rachel expected. It felt as though all those old feelings of inadequacy, the doubt, the insecurity, came flooding back in an instant. She felt small again, the girl who had been torn apart by his criticism, the girl who had been too weak to fight back. The tension in her chest tightened, and for a moment, she questioned herself. Maybe he was right. Maybe this success had been a fluke, a lucky break that she didn't deserve. But then, something shifted inside her. The words, though harsh, didn't have the same power they once did. She had already proved her worth. She had already shown the world that she was capable of writing something meaningful, something that touched people's lives. Reed didn't get to take that from her anymore. As if on cue, Reed tried to rewrite history, as he always did. I always knew Rachel had potential, he said, turning to a group of people nearby. I pushed her harder than any of the other students. I saw the talent in her before anyone else did. Rachel's stomach twisted as she heard his lies spill out. It was as if he had completely erased the reality of what had happened, the years of tearing her down, the words that had made her feel worthless. Now, he was claiming to be her savior, the man who had believed in her all along. For a moment, Rachel considered calling him out, confronting him right there, in front of the crowd. She could expose his lies, remind everyone how he had torn her apart, how he had told her she wasn't good enough. She could make him feel the shame he deserved. But then, she stopped herself. She didn't need to stoop to his level. She didn't need his acknowledgement. She had already succeeded without him. Instead of publicly confronting him, Rachel made a decision. She would let the world hear her truth through her speech, through the story she had carefully crafted. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of taking up any more of her headspace. When the break ended, Rachel returned to the stage, her posture stronger than before, her voice steady. She had nothing left to prove to Reed, to anyone. The truth of her journey was already in the hands of the audience, and that was all that mattered. She would let her success speak for itself. As Reed's voice faded into the background, Rachel continued with her speech, determined to own her story, to reclaim the narrative he had once tried to destroy. Rachel stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding with anticipation. The room before her was filled with eager faces, all waiting for her words. She glanced at the podium, the microphone in front of her, and for a brief moment, everything else faded. This was her moment, her chance to speak her truth. She took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for being here today," Rachel began, her voice steady. "I'd like to extend my gratitude to the festival organizers for giving me this incredible opportunity to share my story with you all. It truly means the world to me. I'm here today to talk about my journey as a writer and, of course, about my book, The Evening Stars," she said, holding up a copy for the audience to see. She smiled, feeling the warmth of their attention, but something shifted inside her. She had planned to speak about her career, her successes, and the excitement of seeing her book out in the world. But now, standing in front of the crowd, she realized there was a deeper story to tell, one that wasn't about accolades or achievements, but about the journey that had brought her here. She could feel the weight of it all, and she knew this was the time to speak up. Rachel's tone changed as she shifted the direction of her speech. "But before I talk about my book, I need to share something personal with you all, something that shaped the writer I am today. You see, my journey to this stage wasn't easy. There were years of doubt, of being told I wasn't good enough. In college, I had a professor who made it clear that he didn't believe in me." She paused, steadying herself, knowing this was the moment where she would reveal the truth. She reached into her bag, pulling out a stack of papers. "These are my assignments from his class. The ones that nearly broke me. I kept them, not because I wanted to remember the hurt, but because I needed to remind myself of how far I've come." Rachel placed the papers on the podium for the audience to see. "This is how he saw my work. Hopelessly amateurish," he said. "Perhaps you should consider a career that doesn't require intellectual depth or mastery of language." The audience was silent as Rachel continued, her voice unwavering. "These words from Professor Reed stuck with me. They made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and my writing. His criticisms wounded me, and for years, I carried that pain. It took time, but I slowly realized that his words didn't define me. I had to find my own path, find mentors who believed in me, people who saw potential where he only saw failure." As she spoke, she could feel the weight of those years of emotional baggage beginning to lift. The crowd's reaction was palpable: shock, empathy, and a deep understanding. Rachel could hear the soft murmurs as they absorbed her words, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. But it was Reed's reaction that caught her attention. She glanced at him in the front row. His face had gone red, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He tried to avoid eye contact with the audience, his arrogance slowly crumbling. Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had spent years trying to diminish her, and now, in front of all these people, his version of events was falling apart. The applause came, soft at first, then growing stronger. Rachel felt a deep sense of release. This was the moment she had waited for, not for the applause, but for the acknowledgement that her voice, her story, had value. She had come full circle, and the past no longer had control over her. As Rachel finished her keynote speech, the room exploded into applause. The sound reverberated through her, an overwhelming flood of affirmation she hadn't expected, but deeply needed. People leaped to their feet, giving her a standing ovation that lasted longer than she had imagined. Her heart raced, and for the first time, the years of doubt and insecurity seemed distant, like they belonged to someone else. As she stood there, taking in the applause, the faces around her reflected admiration and respect, emotions she had once yearned for but now realized were secondary to her own belief in herself. Afterward, people began to approach her, one by one. Each person shared their own struggles, their own battles with self-doubt and rejection. They spoke about how her story had inspired them to push through their own hardships. Their words were a balm to Rachel's soul, comforting her in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She listened intently, touched by how her vulnerability had touched others. She realized in that moment that her journey had transcended her own experience and had become a source of strength for others. Meanwhile, Reed, once a figure of influence and authority, tried to blend into the crowd, attempting to network with other literary professionals. But the reception was far from welcoming. Whispers began circulating quickly, and Rachel could feel the shift in the air. People who had once sought Reed's approval were now avoiding him. His past manipulations and the way he had tried to claim credit for Rachel's success became widely known, and it didn't take long for his reputation to crumble. His attempts to charm others fell flat as more and more people distanced themselves from him. It was as if his power had vanished overnight, exposed for what it truly was, a hollow facade built on the backs of others' struggles. Amidst the crowd, a new opportunity arose. William Foster, a respected film producer, approached Rachel. "I was truly moved by your story," he said, his voice sincere. "The Evening Stars has such depth, and your authentic voice is what makes it resonate so deeply with readers. I would love to talk about adapting it into a film." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. A film adaptation? She hadn't even considered that, but the idea felt surreal and exciting all at once. As the conversation with William continued, Rachel's mind wandered back to everything that had led her here. The years of questioning herself, the harsh criticisms, and the doubts. She realized, with a newfound clarity, that the validation she had always sought from Reed, from others, didn't matter. The real validation came from herself, from her own unwavering belief that she could do it, that she was worthy of success. And now, with this moment, she understood that nothing would ever take that away from her again. She had achieved success on her own terms, and that was something no one could take from her. After the festival, Rachel felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The weight of Reed's judgment, which had shadowed her every step since college, had finally been lifted. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to prove herself to anyone. She had already done that. She had spoken her truth, shared her story, and found her place in the world on her own terms. As she walked away from the festival, the applause still echoing in her mind, Rachel couldn't help but smile. She had come so far, and yet this was just the beginning. With each passing day, Rachel's confidence grew. The validation she had once sought from others was no longer necessary. She no longer needed to seek approval or validation from people like Reed, who had tried to diminish her. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities, and to never let anyone's words define her. Her success was a reflection of her hard work, perseverance, and the courage to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. As her career continued to unfold, Rachel vowed to never forget the importance of self-belief. It had been the key to her journey, her ability to push forward, no matter the obstacles, to keep creating and writing, even when the world told her she wasn't good enough. Rachel knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be moments of doubt, days when the pressure felt too heavy, and times when she questioned whether she could keep going. But she was no longer afraid of those moments. She had faced the darkest parts of herself and emerged stronger. She had found her voice and had learned to trust it. And as she looked toward the future, there was only excitement. She had a story to tell, and there were so many more stories waiting to be written. She was ready for whatever came next. The possibilities seemed endless, And for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt the freedom to embrace them. Whether it was continuing to write, working on new projects, or inspiring others who had been in her shoes, she knew her purpose. She was a writer, not because anyone had given her permission, but because she had earned the right to tell her story. As Rachel sat at her desk later that evening, pen in hand, the words flowed easily. The feeling of possibility filled her, and she knew she had more to say, more to create. With a renewed sense of purpose, she wrote not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, for everyone who had ever doubted their own potential. She wrote for those who needed to hear that they, too, could rise above the shadows and find their own light. And with each word, she knew she was making her mark, ready to inspire the next generation of dreamers, just as she had once dreamed.